Okay, we're now going to look at a very simple application of what we've already looked at in this series, and that is the ability to display data from a database and also allow us to insert records as well. So this functionality is going to be all on one page. You can already see that we have the records that we have in the database output here, and we also then have the ability to go in and add more records. So we can enter data here. Obviously this doesn't look very nice, but you know, it's the ability to actually insert it that we're interested in. So I can go ahead and insert new records here. So by doing this, we're sort of getting used to the fact that we can tie everything in that we've already looked at and actually apply it to an application. So what we're going to do here is start from scratch, build up the markup here, and give the ability, using what we've learned, to insert and retrieve records from our database. So let's just go have a little peek at our database here. You can see that that record has indeed been inserted, and it's visible on the web page. So let's go ahead and start writing the code for this. So the first thing that we're going to actually focus on is outputting this data into a table on our page. So we're going to build some markup and fetch the results as we normally would, and then output them in this table at the bottom of our page in our markup. Now you've probably noticed that we have an extra require here, and this is inside the functions folder, and we're requiring this security.php file. Basically what I've created here is a function that escapes a string ready for output. So this is to prevent or help prevent XSS attacks by basically data that looks like this. So if someone was to insert a record in the database that was an opening and closing script tag and an alert, that would then be output to our page, and then it would run as a JavaScript snippet of code, so we would actually see an alert. Now what we want to do with HTML entities is convert the characters that we've just seen into their entity equivalent. We've provided end quotes which will escape single and double quotes, and we've provided character encoding of UTF-8, which is a security consideration when using this function. So that's what we've done there. Let's go ahead and build the markup for our page, just roughly build some markup. We're not going to include any style sheets or anything like that because we don't want it to look very nice. So I'm just building the HTML tags. I'm going to build a head tag here and a body tag. So inside the head, I'm just going to add a title. And this is just going to say people. So inside body now, we want a header. So I'll just use an H3 element. We'll just say people. So here what we want is our table. So let's just construct the overall markup of our table. So no PHP code yet. You know, we'll do that in a moment. So we have a T head. We'll open and close that, and we also have a T body, and we'll open and close that. If you've not worked with markup too much before, don't worry. This is basically just constructing a table. So you know, give it a go constructing this as best you can. We then want table rows for the header, or one table row for the header, and we want table head elements inside of here. And these are just going to be, by default, most browsers will style these in bold. So it's just basically the header of the table. Nice semantic markup. So we want a first name, we want a last name, we want a bio, and we want the date that the record was created. So in the T body now, let's go ahead and add this markup. So it's a TD this time, not a TH. So let's go ahead and just add some dummy information in, just so we can see how this works. So we'll say Alex Garrett, developer, and we'll just say date there. We don't really need to construct a date for this example. So that's how our table will look. Doesn't look very nice. You know, this is default markup. We're not styling it at all. We're not really worried about that. We're more focused on the PHP side of things. So we have our table now that we can output data from. Let's go ahead and put an HR there. Now this space down here is going to be reserved for our input form. But now what we want to do is actually retrieve the results from our database so we can output them if we want. What we're going to do is we're going to work in a sort of logic at the top, view at the bottom kind of style. So we're going to create an array called records, and that's going to be an empty array. Now what this is going to do is it's going to store the records that we want to output below. We're going to loop through. We're going to retrieve these as an object, store them in this records array, and then down here we can check if this records has any content, and we can loop around this area to generate the records. So it's a concept that basically you're just collecting data and then outputting it at the bottom of the page. So what do we want to do? Well, we're going to create an if statement and assign a results variable inside of this. So different from records, this is going to be the result of our database query. Now we're not binding anything from here. All we literally want to do is we want to select everything from the people table. That's all we're doing. So now what we want to do is check if we actually have any rows returned or not, so the row count basically. And remember that we have a property called num_rows available to us from this results object here, the MySQLi results object. So now we say if results num_rows, that's it. So if that's a positive number, we can assume that we have at least one row. So now we can loop through. So we're going to say while row equals, so assigning this each time, so results fetch, and remember we said we want to fetch an object. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say records, remember that's this array here, and this is the notation to append a value to an array, so append a row or value if you like to an array. So we're going to append row for each one. So now what we're going to do is just free up the results that we've grabbed. We don't need that in memory anymore, so let's free that up. And we'll go ahead and refresh, just make sure we don't have any errors. And we don't. We've just got a horizontal line there that we created in the markup. So how do we know that records actually contains data? Well, let's go ahead and just print this out, just so we can sort of see what we're dealing with. It's always a good idea to jump in and see what kind of data we're dealing with. So we'll do a print R on records. So let's refresh, and there we go. We can see that we've got three objects here. The example that we added this new record in here and the two existing records. So we've now got this that we can loop through and access by object property notation, first name, last name, buyer created, and ID if we need to. So we don't need to print R on this, so let's get rid of this. What we do need to do, however, is down here, we need to figure out which part of this markup we actually want to loop through. Now the part of the markup we want to loop through is the TR. So what we want is some PHP tags around here with an if statement. So if something, I'll just put 1 in there for now, then we want to end that there. Let's just indent that so we can read it a little bit better. So what do we want to check? Well, we want to check if there has been a count, or the count returns a positive number on the records array. So count records. So we're counting this, which we're potentially storing data in. We don't have to be. If there's no records available, then we won't have anything to show. So we want to say if count records. In fact, what we could do is put this if statement at the top of here, which probably would make a bit more sense, to be honest. So let's go ahead and do that. And that way, if there are no records, the markup for the table isn't actually displayed at all. So we'll say if, indent that, if count records. We could even say if no count records otherwise. So if no count records, echo no records otherwise, and we'll just end our if statement down here. Lovely, and we'll indent our table. So if there are records, we're going to generate this markup, and then we want to loop through this bit here. So now we can actually create our loop down here. So our for each loop. So for each records as, and I'm just going to call it R just so it saves typing, go ahead and end that loop there, and we'll indent this. Now for each of the records that we stored here, we now have access to down here, so we can just replace this basically. So I'm just going to replace this with echo our first name, and I'm going to do the same for each one, but more importantly, remember our security function, our escape function, takes a string, converts HTML entities or characters into that entity equivalent with single and double quote protection and UTF-8 encoding. We need to use this in here just in case any data has any potential XSS content that could cause an XSS attack. So last name, copy and paste this again, bio, copy and paste this again, created. So let's take a look at what's actually happened here. Okay, we have a syntax error, so that's on line 56, and there we are. So we forgot that curly brace there. No problem at all. So when we refresh now, we see that we get all of these records output in the table nicely. Brilliant. We've done what we've set out to do in the case of outputting data. Now what we need to do is build the form down here that's going to allow us to actually insert a record, and we're going to be doing some binding here as well. Now we're not going to be doing any validation. Is this name bigger than X amount of characters? All we're going to be doing is making sure this data is set and making sure it's not empty. The validation that we're going to be doing here is probably not recommended for large sets of data because it will get quite messy. It's better to use some kind of validation class or build your own validation class or something like that. But for now, this small amount of data and the fact that we're focusing on MySQL doesn't really matter. So the method is going to be post and the action is going to be empty. We're going to submit back to this page. What we're now going to do is create 3 divs, and we have these as a class of field. I'm just imagining that these would be styled in a certain way, but for now we'll just use these to sort of break things up. So we have a label for, and this is going to be for first name, and this will be first name. And then we have an input field here. So an input type of text. We have a name of first name. That's how we're going to reference it in PHP when it's available in our post array. And then we have an ID, so we can match this up to the label. That just means if you click the label, it will automatically highlight the field for you. So when I click this label, this is highlighted. It's just a usability thing. And that's it really. That's all we need to do. We'll also set autocomplete off. Okay, so let's duplicate this twice. So this is going to be last name. This is going to say last name. This will be last name. This will of course as well be last name. And then just one more, which is the bio. And this will obviously say bio. This isn't going to be a input field. It's going to be a text area. So nothing changes in PHP when we're reading this way. This is going to be name, bio, ID, bio, and that's it. So now that we've got all of our data together, or our fields together, we want to create a button or a submit button that's going to allow us to actually submit this. So we'll say submit value insert. So that's all we're going to do. That's basically our form there. We can click insert, it submits, and we have access to the data in PHP. Let's go all the way up, and just up here we're going to perform a couple of checks just to see if this data is available. So the first one is if not empty $_post. So does post have some data in it? Well, if it does, that means we can then check if first name, last name, and bio are set using the isSet construct. So we can say isSet post first name. You'll notice a lot of repetition here, and that's why I mentioned about using a validator class or alternative way of validating. If you were to end up with say 20 fields here, you wouldn't want to do it this way. Just a little word of warning. So post last name and $_post bio. So we're checking if our 3 fields are set. If they are set, we want to create a variable for each one of them. Again, you can see how this would be tedious if we had a lot of input data. So that's going to be first name. And we also want to trim that as well. Just trim the left white space on the left and right. Again, we're not escaping anything at this point. There's no need because we're going to be binding these values. This is going to be bio. Let's just line these up so it's easier to read. So last name and bio. Wonderful. So now what we want to do is go ahead and check if they're empty. So we'll promise you the one last check. So not empty first name. And if a user was to type a load of spaces, and this is why we use trim, a load of spaces are not empty because it does have content. If we trim a load of spaces, that then will be empty because we trim from the left and right hand side, which will eventually meet and cause it to be an empty string. So if not empty, last name, and last of all, not empty, bio. Great, now we can get down to actually working with our database and binding these values. Very straightforward. We're just going to prepare a statement, bind 3 parameters, all of string type. We're also going to include the created value, so that will be a MySQL function. We'll execute the statement. If the statement has been executed successfully, we're going to redirect back to this page, and then we'll see the record that's been inserted. So we'll create a variable called insert. So this will be db prepare. Remember, we're preparing a statement here. We're not actually querying the database at the moment. So we're going to insert into people. Now we need to insert the first name, the last name, the bio, and the created at date. Remember, we don't need to include the ID. That's auto increment. So the values on this are going to be question mark, question mark, question mark, and now. So this question mark refers to first name, this to last name, this to bio, and now to created. So we need to now bind 3 values. We don't need to bind 4 values because we've supplied at the now function return value for created field. We just need to bind 3 values because we have 3 question marks here. So all we do is we say insert bind param. And in here, we want to define that we have 3 strings, and then we want a comma separated list of all of the values that we want to bind here. So first name, last name, and bio. If, for example, bio was an integer, we would change this to I, because this represents the first variable, this the second, and this the third, but they are in fact all strings. Now we want a quick check just to check if the statement was we're executing and checking it was okay at the same time. So this will execute the prepared statement with the bound parameters, and it will then determine in this if statement whether it was successful or not. If it was successful, we want to use the header function to point to a particular location. That will be index.php, and then we just want to kill the script, or we can exit the script, doesn't really matter. So we're actually now done. What we can now do is go and preview our page. And what's going to happen on our page is, the first thing that's going to do is obviously everything gets included. We're checking whether there have been results or something submitted. We'll explain over this in just a moment. But it's important that this falls below this, because what it will then do is it will grab the results after this has been inserted. So we're inserting first, then grabbing results, which will show the newest result. It doesn't really matter in this case because we're refreshing the page, so this could be in fact above this. Yeah, we're just redirecting so a user can't keep hitting F5 and inserting data again and again and again. So that what we're then doing is running the markup, checking the count of the records. If there are no records, we're outputting no records. Otherwise, we are creating a table here. We're then looping through the records that we retrieved up here, that we stored in this records array, and then we're just outputting the escape data from our database. So I think the first thing that we should do is go ahead and truncate our database. So if we go to Operations tab, we can truncate the table, which basically means remove all data from the table. We hit enter, and it says here no record. So as expected, we've got that message back there. I'm now going to go ahead and just add a record. So what's going to happen here is when we click insert, let's just pop back to the code to explain this again. This is true because we have data in our post array. Remember, we defined that we wanted to submit this data as a method of post. What we then do is check if each of these are set. So are they available in this post array? If they are, let's assign the values of these to these variables, trimming the white space from the left and the right hand side. We're then checking if they're empty or not. So has a value been actually entered physically into that field? If it has, we prepare a statement with 3 parameters that we need to bind. And then we insert, we bind the parameters on this insert variable we created. We have 3 strings, first name, last name, and bio. We then execute it while checking that the execution happened and worked correctly. Then we redirect to index.php, and if for whatever reason that fails, we kill the page because we don't want to continue running it. So let's go ahead and click insert, and there we are. We have our data inserted. So in this example, we've looked at retrieving data and inserting data all on the same page to actually create something that could be classed as a usable application. And we've done that all using binding, selecting, using objects because we're working in an object-oriented fashion with MySQLi, and with outputting escape data. So let's just take a quick peek at the fact that we have escape data, and we'll understand what that means. So I'm going to write Billy Garrett in here, and I'm going to write some JavaScript within script tags. So let's say alert. We'll just say 1 for now. So if I insert this, nothing happens. We just see this code here. In the database, it looks like this. So it's very much unescaped in the database in terms of the tags and the markup. But what our HTML entities function does is it converts that to its entity equivalent. So if I put that back a moment and I go into my source code, you can see that this is actually being converted into entities, and therefore it can't be interpreted by the browser as JavaScript, and therefore we protect against an XSS attack. What happens if I don't escape the data? Well, you probably guessed, when we go ahead and refresh here, we get this page at localhost says 1. The script at this point stops executing when we hit OK, and we run the rest, and we have an empty space here where that JavaScript code is. So it's important to escape data. It's important to bind, or not necessarily bind values, but escape data to prevent against SQL injection on the way into your database as well. But we've encapsulated this in one usable page. So hopefully all of this code, however complicated it might look, is actually quite simple. Hopefully it makes sense.